Why do topics like immigration matter to us? We're in the Magic Valley. We're in Twin Falls. I'm in Kimberly. We're so far away from what the federal government is doing with immigration. What can we possibly do? Well, if possession is 9/10 of the law, we're on the ground. We're the ones who are here taking care of the problems. We're the ones who will execute solutions here. We're the ones who will think of solutions. The issue, though, is that topics like immigration are so plagued by dishonesty. Frankly, that's the state of politics today. It's much easier to trick you and make something seem like something else than it is to actually convince you. That's the state of politics today. It's obscured by dishonest rhetoric. The words they use, they shift meanings in the middle of the argument to mean something else, and so that you think you're agreeing with one thing when you're actually agreeing with another. And it's very biased on both sides. I believe that we can, if we agree on, we understand the truth about these things, that we can come to some solutions that work for our county and for our state. But we can't do that if we're not clear and honest about the topic. And so that's what we're doing. We're looking at articles that are going to help us be clear and honest about the topic. And even if you don't care about the topic, these principles apply to any topic you can imagine. We need clarity. We need to understand the true problem in order to find solutions. Albert Einstein, I think, said, and probably Abraham Lincoln and a bunch of other guys said, if you give me 10 hours to solve a problem, what is it, 10 hours? 60 minutes to solve a problem, I'll spend 59 minutes defining it, and then I'll spend 1 minute solving the problem. And I found that to be true for difficult problems. And so let's do that. Let's apply that principle. Let's use liberal arts principles to ask questions about the truth about a topic, and then use reason and logic to understand what can we do to fix it. Let's go. All right, I'm working through an article on deseret.news.com, and it's called "Is the Solution to America's Immigration Crisis Hiding Inside an Idaho Dairy Farm?" So this is part two, and we're looking at is we're down here, and we're wondering, hey, is there a solution to immigrate to the immigration problem, or are we misunderstanding it to begin with, or what's going on? So let's find out. So immigration, let's pick up here. Immigration reform wasn't a priority when Bob and Doris got to Twin Falls, though it was a tight labor market. The dairies had ample access to a stable workforce until 2007. The immigration debate felt far away. The relationship between dairy farmer and dairy worker is unique. It's a 24 hours a day, 365 operation. The cows require milking twice daily to maintain their health and productivity. As a result, dairy owners and their workers get to know each other as colleagues and friends. And with an up to 70% of all US farm workers being undocumented and 85 to 90% of on site. Oh, I didn't realize I was sharing so much. Let me go ahead and go to my other screen here. There we go. And with up to 70% of all US farm workers being undocumented and 85 to 90% of on site dairy workers in Idaho being foreign born, the stresses of life take on a unique quality. All right, so undocumented, 70% of all US farm workers being undocumented. And it looks like there's probably on Politico. I'm not totally sure that's a unbiased source, but especially since the Trump immigration crackdown Idaho dairy industry. So interesting. So they're labeling of the Trump immigration crackdown, which I think it would be, right? Um, does Trump really not know this? I don't know. I mean, does he really not, or is this all true? I don't know. I don't have that information. We need to be asking these questions. And 85 to 90% of on-site dairy workers in Idaho being foreign born. So foreign born, is that our concern here? Maybe. The stresses of life take on a unique quality. We're talking about immigration. I suppose the foreign born aspect is part of it. So, and the next part goes into keep in mind the most common agriculture work visa, the H-2A. This is news to me. I don't know about any of this stuff. It's very interesting. So as an H-2A, see if I can turn my camera better, is available for seasonal agriculture only, but there's no dairy season per se. It's true, right? Cows, you have to milk them all the time, right? They don't just go dormant. They don't hibernate. And that means there is no legal pathway for an immigrant to enter the nation to work on a dairy farm. As a result, a disproportionate number of undocumented immigrants work on dairies and live in rural communities. Okay. So if we're looking at this objectively, we're considering the fact that this is a problem if everything they say is true in this article, and it does feel biased to me. The article itself feels biased. If this is true, though, we do have a problem to deal with, and I'm very curious how conservatives who are anti-immigration would say we're dealing with this. Are there enough workers to work in dairy farms? That's what I want to know, and I kind of want to know a real answer. I don't want to know a hand waving kind of Jedi mind trick answer. I want to know the real answer. I'm not saying it's not out there. In fact, I bet it is. I bet there are people who know the answer to these kinds of questions, and I'd love to interview them. I don't have the time. What I'm doing is asking for help right now. All right, so at a time when most of rural America was shrinking due to declining fertility rates, mortality, and struggling economies, the Magic Valley was growing, and that growth was being driven by Latino immigrants. In Idaho, after Governor John Evans established the Indo-Chinese Refugee Assistance Program in 1975, the College of Southern Idaho Refugee Program, CSI Refugee Program, led resettlement efforts in the Magic Valley and surrounding communities. Okay. Hey, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know that this was associated with the College of Southern Idaho. I had no idea. I think everybody's just kind of wondering where this is coming from, who's in charge of it, and who's responsible for making sure there's order. And I don't think anyone that I know of has any sense of understanding or order or senses a feeling of order from what's going on. So I think a lot of people are just like, I don't know what's going on. I feel out of control. And I think that's why we need to be asking these questions. This is just the start. I'm using this to kind of get us going on a few questions that I think we should be asking to make sense of things for our community. And so I hope you're with me on this. Let's go back to it. All right, so the CSI refugee program led resettlement efforts in the Magic Valley and surrounding communities. Along the way, what began as a community of refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos expanded to include Eastern Europeans and Africans. As the only provider of refugee services in South Central Idaho, the CSI refugee program resettled more than 2,500 refugees and brought more than $3 million in federal resources and benefits to the Magic Valley. Is that $3 million? So, an obvious question is, okay, you brought $3 million. Who was that spent on, and who got to spend it? Was it the refugees? Was that $3 million divided by 2,500 refugees? 1, 2, 3 divided by 2,500. They each got $1,200. I don't know. I have no idea where that money is going. Maybe it says later down in the article. But this does seem to say, oh, hey, look, you got all this money in the area and it was spent in the local economy. Maybe. And maybe it's worth it. I don't know. My question is, wouldn't it be great to know how many of these refugees are contributing to society and how many of them are a drain on society? How many of them are, and you have to include, in addition to the financial drain, if there is one, if there's a net drain, and how much welfare do they get, things like that. How much of that is federal, how much is state? In order to know whether this is a good thing or not, maybe part of it is this question of what is the cost? What is the cultural cost? Do we have a cultural cost where now we're divided more because we have more communities that don't share our beliefs and don't share our, they don't even really understand why we have the laws we have, and they and therefore don't honor those laws? I don't know. I mean, I just know that there are things happening in the world today in our country that reflect the clash of different cultures. And so we have to ask these questions. We can't just be like, oh, if you ask these questions, you're racist. And we can't just be like, yeah, anytime immigrant comes in, that's a bad thing. Or even anytime an illegal immigrant comes in, that's a bad thing. Undocumented, whatever you want to call it, it's a bad thing. We have to think with our brains, not with sound bites, not with labels that other people put on these things for us. If you're here, you're probably with me on that. All right. So at the program's helm, Zizi Rasama, at 19 years old, Rasama became a refugee, fleeing the threat of violence against members of the ethnic minority tribe of Congolese Tutsis, to which he belonged. Living in a refugee camp with his family, he was able to work with the United Nations and earn a scholarship to attend the University of Rwanda. In 2001, the large Rasama family relocated to Salt Lake City, where Zizi pursued more higher education, was offered the opportunity in Twin Falls to run the CSI refugee program in 2014. Great. Meanwhile, Syrian refugees pressed against the borders of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, though the United States was slow to act. In April 2015, so, a lot of us are wondering, okay, the United States was slow. Were we supposed to do something? Which is another question. It's another. The United States was slow to act. What is values are implied in the sentence? Bias is implied in the sentence. Um, it's our job apparently to do this. Okay, well, let's try to separate these things. Right? There's a lot of bias in this article. Let's try to separate these things out and not try to judge him wrong just because he has some bias. In April 2015, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Ann Richard announced that between 1,000 and 2,000 Syrian refugees would be brought to the United States by the end of September. So, Syrian refugees, there's going to be a big difference between religions, and so if you have a Muslim living in a Christian country, uh, you're it's possible to have differences and to have people who don't respect our laws. I think that's one of the worries, and it's a real worry, and questions should be asked. It shouldn't be something that's shrugged off as racism. Questions need to be asked. So 2,000 Syrian refugees would be brought to the United States by the end of September. Osama was not worried. The refugee center had already settled more than 1,000 refugees from Iraq, so language and cultural issues would not be an obstacle to helping people become self-sufficient. So language and cultural issues aren't an obstacle. That seems like a overly rosy statement. Of course, they're an obstacle. Maybe what he means is that they're not insurmountable, and we have ways to deal with them. But they're for sure an obstacle. Whenever you have cultural disagreement, there are going to be disagreement about laws, literally because you're different cultures. It's not possible to have different cultures from different parts of the world. You push them together, and they're going to agree on the same laws. There's going to be a bigger difference in how they see things. You might have cultures that overlap in some areas, but if it's a different culture, the definition of a different culture means you have different values. Even if they're not super huge, like a Catholic and Protestant might have fewer disagreements than a Muslim would. These things are not. It blows my mind that people cannot see these things. I'm not saying that they're insurmountable, but by definition, right? I don't think it's an extreme point of view. It's by definition, these things are going to be obstacles. Helping people become self-sufficient, the context being in the United States in a new place where they don't speak the language and they don't share the culture. The problem was that the local press framed the story as an influx of Syrians. At a moment, Americans were seeing news reports of millions of Syrians seeking refuge. So why is that a problem? Was it not true? Did it give a false impression? And I think maybe the author is saying it gave an unhelpful impression, because if you have an influx of Syrians, to me that's not a biased statement. It's an influx of Syrians. It's literally more Syrians. It's possible that this person thinks that we shouldn't have even mentioned it at all, because by mentioning it, we're causing problems. I would disagree with that. People need to know what's going on in their own community. And so that's probably a disagreement that I would have with the author. Let's continue. When it comes to immigration, perception is reality. Um, what people saw on their screens, fed by Breitbart News and Facebook memes. Okay, so he's blaming this is conservative, right? Breitbart, conservative, and Facebook memes. So he's kind of pushing back on that conservatism. Led them to believe their community was going to change overnight and they might become refugees in their own city. So yeah, maybe. And I think that if what he said is true and those things did do that, then I think that could be a problem. But I don't know if anybody really knew. To what extent did we know the community was not going to change overnight or over the next year, right? Or over the next couple of years. And so, yeah, I mean, clearly though, this kind of makes me think, all right, maybe he's a little more on the liberal side. A lot of these hints we should be able to identify. Rosama realized that most of the pressure against refugee resettlement was coming from outside the state. But since most of the pressure was coming from outside of the state, okay, I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know if I care. But since local leaders were not publicly defending the program, Rosama worried about what would happen in a vacuum of accurate information if the out-of-state voices got louder. Okay, we're assuming that there's not accurate information. We're taking his word for it that this was all inaccurate information or mostly inaccurate, and that maybe he's saying that external outside the state information is inaccurate. I don't think he's not proving that. He's claiming it. And so, but since local leaders are not publicly defending the program or so on worried, out-of-state voices got louder. He decided to tour the small towns 100 miles in each direction of Twin Falls and explain the CSI resettlement program. As courageous and important as Rassama's efforts were, without allies, it was impossible. It was an impossible task once the national spotlight trained its eye on the Magic Valley. Okay. All this stuff is, he's asking us to assume a lot of things in order to be with him at the end of this, to where like, oh, and this guy's noble efforts were hindered because of the situation he was in. But I have a question. Was it hindered because nobody believed him because he's wrong? I don't know. I mean, right here, it's like, oh, let them believe their community was going to change overnight. Well, we have Syrian refugees are coming in, but did the community change as soon as they came? Yeah. Did the culture of the community change? Yeah. The differences in culture? Yeah. Were they refugees in their own city overnight? I mean, is this something that the Breitbart News and Facebook meme said, or was this something that he's saying, the author is saying? We got to ask these questions, right? We can't just be like, oh, since it didn't change overnight, since crime statistics didn't change the next day, then I don't know that they didn't or that they did. I'm just saying that, oh, well, then it's not an issue, right? Then immigration is not an issue. I don't think he's making a good case here. I don't think he's making a good argument. He's not giving us data. He's not answering questions that I would ask. The questions I'm asking right now, he's not answering them. But that's why we're reading this, so we can understand really what's going on and we can evaluate these things in an intelligent way. Okay, so Rick Martin led the local opposition and created the committee to end the CSI Refugee Center. He told Reuters, bringing Syrians who are predominantly of Muslim background may be sick, opening the door to terrorists pretending to be refugees. Yes, that I suppose that may be, right? Unless they're vetting them and vetting them sufficiently, and we don't have that. Of course, Martin added, we're not against legitimate refugees. They need to be treated with dignity and respect, but it would be easy for someone to lie about their background. Turns out there's always a reason not to treat someone with dignity and respect. Oh, really? Okay. Is he going to explain that, or is this just kind of a snarky remark about this quote? Because I think we'd all agree with this, right? We're not against legitimate refugees. What do we mean legitimate? And that's the question, right? That's kind of the question here. Turns out there's always a reason not to treat someone with dignity and respect. Is it about to get spicy and good here? Let's see. Because I was going to cut this off pretty soon, but I want to know what he's going to say next. A September 2015 community forum attracted 700 people to hear. Okay, what happened? To hear from the city and federal officials. In the spring of 2016, Martin led an unsuccessful attempt to gather enough signatures to pose a ballot question about the future of the CSI Refugee Center. Realizing there needed to be outspoken allies to the immigrant and refugee community, the dairymen, including Bob Narabout, stepped forward and launched a petition to urge Idaho congressional delegation to move forward with needed immigration reforms. They organized 3,100 signatures, a remarkable achievement in a conservative rural state like Idaho. The Idaho Dairymen's Association played an outsized role in the political debate around immigration. Okay, that might be evidence that everything you said about dairy was true. They stood to benefit tremendously from reforms, and they had the access to legislators to make their case. Initially paralyzed by the political dynamics of the 2016 election, the dairymen realized that as conservatives with their own immigration story, they had a responsibility to lead the effort to advance immigration reforms. Okay, this confuses me a little bit. So the Idaho Dairymen Association played an outsized role in the political debate around immigration. So at a time when Democrats are, I don't know if they're still for the working man or not. I don't know if that's a thing, right? If they're still for the working man or not. But now we're talking about this article it does not feel conservative. This article does not feel conservative. It feels like it might be trying to convince conservatives. It doesn't feel very conservative. And now we're hearing that the Idaho dairymen are doing something very, trying to change laws to benefit their own industry and not hire local people, not let salaries go higher so they can hire local people. Yeah, milk prices would go up if that happened, right? The exporting milk to Michigan and other states wouldn't be as easy to do, right? But that's interesting, right? It's an interesting take. Guys, I mean, this is the whole reason we're doing this is so that we can see what's really going on. And when we ask these questions and we see these contradictions, and we start pulling on them and start asking questions about them, that's where the really interesting stuff is. That's where reporters find the most interesting stories. They stood to benefit tremendously from reforms. Yes, they benefited. Yes, that's a good thing for them. And they had the access to the legislators to make their case. I am very in favor of the dairy industry. Don't get me wrong. The questions need to be asked because the dairy industry can be corrupt too, and journalists are interested in corruption and understanding it. Initially paralyzed by the political dynamics of the 2016 election, initially paralyzed, the dairymen realized that as conservatives with their own immigration story, they had a responsibility to lead the effort to advance immigration reforms. So all of a sudden now they're like, oh, we benefit from the. That's what it sounds like when I read this, right? If I'm reading it really objectively, I'm like, okay, all of a sudden these guys, they're all conservative, but then it's like, well, oh yeah, well, it'll benefit us. Oh, we have our own immigration story. That's just how it reads to me. I don't know how you guys read it. Everybody I know in dairy, I love. Don't get me wrong, but that's how this reads. And we got to see the hypocrisy and call it out if we see it. Not saying it's there. I'm saying that that's how we need to notice these things. They had come to realize as Rasama first saw that the opposition came from the small, very vocal minority who only seemed large because of an outsized social media presence. Without a space for the majority to organize their voice, the loudest group seemed to be winning the debate. He has not proved that in this article. He has not shown that. He's made a case. He's told a story like that. He has not proved that. We should not believe that until he proves that. We know it's a very conservative community. We know he already said that there are a lot of people who were against it because they were what do we say above because of Breitbart News and everything. There were a lot of people against it, and now he's saying that it's there's a very very vocal minority, and I'm just wondering can he reconcile those? And it could be that he's saying the vocal minority is the one getting everybody worried. It's possible, but it doesn't say that, and so that makes me think that he might there's the potential of a bait and switch where he starts talking it's equivocation where you you say something, then you say something else that almost kind of sounds like it sounds like something it sounds different, and you can defend it if asked, but it's misleading. It's meant to be misleading. You can explain it if asked, and then you would explain that, oh, well, the truth is whatever, and you aren't able to make your case if you have to explain it, right? So you don't explain it, and you just let people believe what they want to believe, and then blame them for not asking questions. I'm not saying that's what this journalist is doing, but it's possible. Small, very vocal minority who only seemed large. Okay, reaching beyond the association's membership, Narrabout spent a year building a new group of community, faith, law enforcement, and elected leaders that publicly acknowledged that they were caught off guard by the attacks of anti-immigration forces in 2015. To prevent a similar situation from happening again, they launched the Unity Alliance, funded by Chobani, the Idaho Dairymen's Association, Idaho Milk Products, and D.I. Evans Bank. D.L. Evans Bank. The board grew to include representation from the Catholic, Evangelical, Muslim, and Latter-day Saints communities. Okay. So what does this sound like? It sounds like, okay, well, the community the adults came together in the community to reject it. Realize that if he's not specific about who all joined, right, we can probably look at the Unity Alliance and find out. But funded by Chobani, not surprising, right? Chobani's a corporation. They benefit from dairy. The Idaho Dairymen's Association, Idaho Milk Products, and then D.L. Evans Bank. D.L. Evans might be funding, and so they all benefit, right? So there's no surprise there. Faith community, there are a lot of there are some, I know of some very liberal churches out there. It's not like all churches are Christian, and so but some Catholic, Evangelical, Muslim, and LDS communities from the Catholic, Evangelical, Muslim, and Latter-day Saint community. So he's clear that it doesn't mean that all these people were on board. It just means there were some people from those communities who are represented. The dairymen were not done. Narrative change through the Unity Alliance was one thing, but systemic change was in the hands of lawmakers. And the lawmakers that would listen to dairymen may or may not listen to the Hispanic community. Hispanic community? Yeah, maybe they won't because they're too small. It's sounded a little cynical, but In the best case, they didn't have relationships. In the worst case, lawmakers may only see the Hispanic community as a source of labor. That's kind of sad, right? The Hispanic community should be integrating into our culture and shouldn't be left out in the cold. At least that's kind of what I think. Narrabout, as the principal lobbyist for the association, often found himself talking about Latino community concerns with the state's congressional delegation and state lawmakers. Latino leaders in the state trusted Narrabout to keep their interests and issues in mind as he navigated the conservative politics of Idaho. Because the conservative politics are very interesting. Okay. There's almost a subtext there, but I don't want to be too, I don't want to see things where they aren't. As his relationship with the Hispanic community grew and the Unity Alliance took shape, he realized there still wasn't a seat at the table with the lawmakers for the Latino community. The Latino community. So are we still talking about undocumented, illegal Latino community? Is that what we're talking about now? I don't know, because the story drifts, right? And it meanders a little bit, and I'm just wondering if maybe this isn't kind of like, I'm looking at this I'm not speed reading this, obviously. I'm looking at this very closely. And so maybe that's why we see it, because we're looking at it closely, that he's now saying Latino community. That's that equivocation I was talking about, where you're talking about illegals, undocumented being a part of it. And now you're talking about the Latino community just not wanting to be, not being listened to. Well, guess what? If they're not citizens, they're not probably going to be listened to by their representatives. That shouldn't be surprising, right? And so that, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying he needs to say what he means, and he's not saying what he means, and it makes me suspicious. So, and it should make you suspicious too. And so let's continue because we still have more to go, but we'll continue next time. And as we're wrapping things up, I hope you say asking questions. The biggest, most powerful tool of a journalist is asking questions, and asking the dumb questions. The questions you think have already been asked, but clearly the problem's not being solved. And I want to say one thing. I've made a living off of in different places. Let me switch to main screen here. Made a living in different places, taking problems that have existed for a really long time, and then saying, okay, we stop asking what the solution is, and we say, forget the solution. Let's talk about the problem a little more. And now we start talking about the problem, and I start asking questions about the problem, dumb questions that everybody else, like in some situations, I'm not an engineer, so I ask engineers these questions, and they're like, well, you see, it's this. And they start explaining it to me simply. And then someone across the room, another engineer, will say, well, that's not exactly the problem. Actually, the problem is a little more like this. And pretty soon, we understand the problem better than we did before, and the solution just knocks us in the head because it's so simple. But in order to get there, we have to be able to ask questions. And so in order to create a community where we're taking care of each other, where if the federal government doesn't do its job here, that we're doing the job. If there's not enough resources flowing through the local government, we can pick it up. And the way to do that is not to tell everybody to start serving. The way to do that first is to find out, what do we need help with? And if we can look at the news like this, and we can start asking questions, and we can start asking more questions, and I can get you guys involved, and you guys can go ask more questions, learn how to cite a source maybe, learn how to write a quote, write a little story, and just say, here's my interview, here's who I talked to, here's when I talked to them, that kind of thing. It's not super hard. We just need people who are willing to do it, and then ask these questions. Question asking is the most important thing to do. 2 things we can do for Twin Falls, for the Magic Valley: ask questions and ask for help. All right. Well, I hope this has been helpful. We'll continue next time. In the meantime, I appreciate you listening, and stay curious, right? Stay curious. Ask lots of questions. See you guys. I'm Chris Stadler, and I live in Kimberly, Idaho, and I'm here to ask for help. The news sucks. Nobody believes it. It gives us just enough information to be worried and helpless and dependent on politics for our salvation. But we live here, and possession is 9/10 of the law. We're responsible for our own problems, and we can fix them. It all starts with a kind of journalism that helps us understand the problem with the right information and insight. I'm not the solution, but I'm here to use my journalism background to ask good questions and ask for help. I'm Chris Stadler. This is the Magic Valley J School, and this series is Journalist Reacts. Guys, just a reminder that asking the dumb questions is the most important thing you can do in a world where everyone wants you to skip past the most important questions. They want you to think that if you ask the important questions, that you're naive and you should already know the answer because it's so simple. But the truth is, to get to the bottom of tough issues, you ask the dumb questions, the basic questions, the questions they don't want you to question. If you guys have questions, or if you guys have comments, I would love to hear them in the comments of this video. Or if you're seeing this in Facebook, in the comments in Facebook. And in the meantime, guys, keep asking the dumb questions.